right. So it is going live now, and it should tell me in a second. Hey, there we go. All right. We are live and in person doing this little July HashiStack. It is July, right? Yes, it is July. I don't know. Once the summer hits, my brain turns to mush, and I don't know what day it is. I don't know what time it is, but I know I'm doing a lot of Terraform stuff. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the monthly HashiStack conversation. Your host, Ned Bellavance. Unfortunately, Brian was not able to join today. He had a work meeting, and I'm like, dude, where's your priorities? This is clearly much more important. But he disagreed. So, fortunately, I have two excellent HashiCorp ambassadors to help me field questions and chat about all things Hashi. So let's start with Kyler. Would you like to introduce yourself to the audience and tell everybody a little bit about like what you do?
Absolutely. Hey, everyone. Kyler Middleton here from Madison, Wisconsin. I am a senior-ish DevOps engineer in the healthcare space in the United States. Lots of laws, lots of compliance stuff. I find the technical stuff a little boring, which is interesting. I think Tom and Ned will debate me on that. And I really like the human part, the teaching and making stuff easy and grokkable and that kind of stuff. So that's me.
Awesome. Thank you, Kyler. And Tom, what about you?
Hi everyone, I'm Tom. I'm an independent consultant based in the UK. I do a lot of stuff with Terraform, bits of Vault and Boundary. I love the technical stuff, and yeah, I'm here to answer any technical questions that people might have.
Awesome. All right. Well, hopefully we get some people joining up and asking questions. But in the meantime, before when we were in the green room talking about things, Tom, you mentioned that you had just taken 6 months off of work to travel in Southeast Asia. And we both, Kyler and I both agreed that's far more interesting than anything Hashi related. So what inspired that journey and what was interesting about it? I mean, tell all, you know.
Both me and my partner had wanted to travel for a long time, and it was kind of just an aspiration to kind of quit as it was, and then just kind of go for 6 months, not really have a plan, and see where we ended up. So my partner's a nurse in the UK, so she quit, and then I just took a break from work. Working in IT, we've got it relatively easy, and it's easy just to take a break compared to other people in other fields.
Yeah.
So yeah, we upped and went. We got rid of our house, put all of our stuff into storage on the 23rd of December, so literally right before Christmas. And then the 27th of December, we flew to Bangkok to start our journey in Thailand. And then we traveled all the way around Asia and had an absolute blast doing it. And then we got back about 4 weeks ago.
Wow. And so you had to take everything out of storage and get resituated and
yeah,
find a
house
place
to rent.
Find a house.
Yeah, which in the UK is quite difficult at the moment. Finding, we were calling up, there were places that had 13, 14 viewings booked already. So we were super lucky to find this place where we are now. But yeah, it was quite stressful, but yeah.
Yeah. But you got to do that awesome travel. What can you like pick out one or two highlights of the trip, like something unexpected or just amazing, or is there too much to even talk about?
So I guess there's one obvious one. So I proposed to my partner in a hot air balloon over Laos, which is obviously kind of the highlight, I guess.
Well, I assume they said yes. Otherwise, it would have been a low light. Congratulations.
They did. Although she did have a little tantrum before when she found out we were going in a private hot air balloon. But that's another story. And then the second one would be, I really got into diving more like that. So I learned to scuba dive in Koh Tao, which is famously one of the most cheapest places in the world to learn to scuba dive. And then I done 36 dives in total, and I got to rescue diver, which is the one below kind of professional diving. And then I dived in Sipadan, which is in the top 10, and that was incredible. We had like thousands of barracuda, sharks, massive turtles. Yeah, it was absolutely incredible.
Wow.
That's amazing. I've done 6 weeks before to go backpack around Europe and Iceland, and it was great. When I came back, I could not remember how to log into my computer. I had to call someone for help. So 6 months, I can't even imagine. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I
It's
feel
been
like,
difficult coming back to it.
yeah, I feel like even when I'm away for a week and not doing anything work related, I come back, I sit in front of my computer and I just like stare for a while. Like, I remember how to do things right.
Mhm.
Cool. Well, that is amazing. And maybe you can share some more later. Kyla, I wanted to ask you about something actually technical. um, so you had put up a post, maybe it was on Medium or it was on your own site about some really cool stuff you were doing with GitHub Actions. Can you dig into that a little bit and sort of explain the cool things you're doing with GitHub Actions and Terraform?
It's so much because I'm sort of an internal consultant. I think a lot of us get to that role where you're like a platform engineer and an internal consultant or an external consultant, and you get these requests that you would never even imagine. So the way that you would traditionally build Terraform deploys is there's like a GitOps action that when you create a pull request, it tests using a matrix strategy at all of your different environments concurrently. And then when you merge it, it deploys to all your environments concurrently. And like, that just makes sense to me. But this particular team wanted to choose which environments to deploy to and how fast it would deploy. So how many concurrencies at a time. And I've never had to tackle that because why would you control that? But this team wanted to. So I built a Terraform batch action that was able to call a Terraform deploy action. So like action A calling action B, and using a regex pattern to select the environments that it would deploy, and then also a numeric selection of how many concurrently to deploy at a time. So defaulting to 100, like just do all of them. But if they wanted to do single threaded deploys for just the dev environments, of which there are many, there are like 60 Terraform environments for this project, they absolutely could regex target them and do 5 at a time and just do rolling deploys. So it's really interesting. I've written a ton of stuff on my Medium blog. I think I'm just over 80 open source projects linked to Medium articles about how to build stuff in GitHub Actions.
Wow.
So I could keep going for a really long time, but I'll stop there if you have any questions about it.
I sure do. And Tom, feel free to jump in as well. When you say you built an action, what does that entail? What does it mean to build a GitHub action?
Totally. So GitHub Actions are actually, it's interesting compared to like an Azure DevOps where the old model of deployments are you have those little boxes and you drag the boxes around and you say this box and it has a line between it. GitHub Actions are all files that are written in YAML syntax. So it's like literally a file you check in with Git using a pull request. And they have specific triggers that do stuff. And so you can have automated triggers based on Git actions. Like I opened a pull request, I pushed a commit, I merged a PR. Or you can have it trigger based on something a user does. So you click the button that says go and you can select inputs for it. So I used a combination of those things to, first of all, write a GitHub action that can do deployments, do Terraform deploys, like build an action. And then my favorite way to do it is have it sort of do risk calculations automatically as much as we can. So read the Terraform plan. And if it looks dangerous, have it pause and have a human approve. And if it doesn't look dangerous, have it automatically approve. I see Ned's.
What does it mean for it to be dangerous?
Well, that's a great. So if it's, I came up with this scheme. This is a harebrained scheme. First of all, again, this is just, I'm very, very lazy. And I found a way to automate all these approvals that I would have to do each day. So first of all, I just said, if it is going to change anything, do a human approval. That's phase 1. That was really annoying. I was doing dozens and dozens a day. So phase 2, if it's only adding resources, because you can read that Terraform state, like you can literally grep it and read the output, just automatically approve it. And so send it to a deployment that doesn't use an environment that requires a human approval, and then it can deploy. And if it does anything else, like it's changing or deleting, require a human approval. So pause and wait. And that takes care of probably more than half of those like times where people are waiting on you, Kyler, you senior engineer, to just go read their Terraform plan and hit the approve button. And then phase 3, I wrote this sort of statistical model where it would look at specific resources that were permit listed. And if those were deleted and recreated, like a security group rule, who cares? I don't care if it's going to recreate a security group rule that doesn't contain data. It's mostly a metadata construct.
Mhm.
Just go do it. Like, just automatically approve those ones. And it worked really well. I eventually got it more than 90% of the changes per day, which there were several hundred, were just automatically approved. I did nothing. My favorite way to build stuff is no one ever talks to me again, because it works well enough that, like, it's either intuitive enough that a human gets it, or it's automated enough that they don't need to touch it. Either way, they never talk to me again, and I just relax all day and run the automation. That's my dream job. I love it.
That's pretty epic. So Tom, do you have any questions if you want to jump in?
Yeah. So are you like repping for like say, for example, high risk resources in the plan? So like, for example, like an AWS DB or whatever. So if it's going to destroy that, you then send that for a manual gate.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
The one that
That's
I eventually
amazing.
ended on is, if it's going to delete or recreate any resources, then pause. Although there were certain permit listed resources like security group rules, like I don't care if those get deleted, so like just ignore those ones. I also had a list, and this was all just a bash script I wrote. I eventually ported it to Go, but no one at my company wrote in Go. So they were like, I don't understand this. Please go back to bash. So I did. But it's all just a script that was shared templamatically among hundreds of pipelines. And so anyone that had an idea like SQL databases should probably never automatically be approved, they can just add it to the list of scary things that should never be recreated. So I just kind of open sourced it within the company. And I did write this as a public Medium article too, with public code. So y'all can just go steal it and be lazy with me. Everyone be lazy.
Everybody be lazy and go on a 6-month trip.
Yeah, awesome.
So have you considered using something like Open Policy Agent and writing policies in Rego instead of using bash scripting? Or is it using any of that in the back end?
Kind of a Unixy person, so I like to write my own tooling if I can. And we never got to a complexity level where it felt like I needed an external tool. But that would be smarter. It'd be way smarter to use something someone has built that works for this purpose. But I didn't know those existed. So I was like, wow, what a novel idea. What a genius idea, Kyler. Go write it yourself for a month.
Sometimes I find it's better to write it yourself, because then you kind of bump your toes on all the edge cases and figure out where all the sharp corners are. Whereas if it's like a tool that somebody already built for you, you don't discover those things as quickly. And when they do happen, you're like, okay, now I have to pick apart this tool and figure out where it's failing me.
Absolutely. When you write it yourself, you know how it works. You have to, because you did it. And if you don't understand it, it won't work. I'm a proponent. I talk about this all the time in the learning spheres. Like, everything's basics. There's a lot of cool tools. There's Kubernetes. It's magic. It's the infrastructure of the future. No, it's not. It's just basic stuff blended together in a trench coat. So like, just understand how basic stuff works. You can do anything.
It is all raccoons in a trench coat, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, geez. So I thought of another. Well, before we started going live, we also started talking a little bit about different automation platforms. And I wanted to kind of get everyone's opinion. Like, should we all just be using GitHub Actions all the time and forget all the other automation platforms? Or do you see value in stuff like Terraform Cloud, Spacelift, M0, etc.?
I have lots to say, which means I want Tom to go first if you have anything. Otherwise, I'll talk for 5 minutes.
So I've only ever used open source tools. Like, I've never used a platform where I've had to pay. I mean, you have to pay for action runtime or whatever. But most organizations get a big chunk of actions with their whatever plan they're with GitHub. So I've never worked in an organization where they've had the need to go with an offering like Terraform Cloud, Spacelift, M0, because you can replicate all that functionality in GitHub Actions. Like, it's not hard to do, and it's low maintenance as well. And it means that your Terraform plans, applies, and all that are happening where like other developers are doing their changes as well. So the developers might be building Java code, and then it might eventually in a pipeline further on be getting deployed. So for me personally, I see benefit in keeping that kind of action in GitHub Actions and keeping it close to where the developers are doing their main pieces of work. I've still not come across like a massive need to switch to one of those paid offerings. personally, like all the work that I'm doing. Whether that changes in the future, I'm not sure. But yeah, my opinion is that I don't really see a need for it for everybody. I'm sure there are some niche use cases, but I've not come across them yet.
All right. Kyler, go for it.
All right, I'll talk for 5 minutes, so stop me. My opinion is nuanced, which means I'm confused. I traditionally have agreed with Tom. I like open source. I like staying with the same platforms. I think there is a complexity problem when you start to have specific platforms for specific tools or use cases or teams using different things in different ways. It just is rarely worth it. I think we're starting to see that threshold be reached by tools like Spacelift and HashiCorp Cloud Platform for Terraform in particular, because of things like the policy agent, the Sentinel that HashiCorp uses, and also graphically driven targeted deploys and targeted imports. None of those are released yet, as far as I'm aware. That's all stuff that you can do with Terraform. Like, I just want to, it's going to deploy 50 things, but I only want this one thing to deploy, or I want to take this one resource and have Terraform recreate it. You can start to do those things in both of those platforms. I don't think any of those are behind NDAs that I'm not supposed to talk about. If they are, I'm so sorry, HashiCorp team. But it's cool and it's coming. Drift detection also is really cool and rarely replicated in generalized CI/CD platforms. So like something that HashiCorp and Spacelift both do is they monitor your Terraform states, and generally you get your Terraform state to 0 changes, 0 adds, 0 deletes, 0 modifies. And then it can check every hour, 4 hours on a cron schedule. And if it sees those changes, it can A, alert you, someone has changed something or your infrastructure's drifted somehow, or B, automatically reconfigure your environment so it matches up with what it should look like with what your configuration is. And those things are just difficult to replicate in generalized CI/CD platforms. So I think it's cool. I think we're getting to a point where it's going to start to be worth the complexity to adopt those other platforms. And it's taken me a really long time to get there, because I am not a fan of dry coding patterns. I'm a fan of declarative, simplistic coding patterns that anyone can grok and use quickly. But we're getting there. And that's a big deal for me, because I lean so much towards simplicity than perfect code and platforms.
I totally know where you're coming from, because I think, kind of to Tom's point as well, if you're using something like GitHub Actions, everything lives with the code. So it's really easy to go, oh, what's the workflow? Oh, that's easy. I'll just look in the folder, in the code editor that I'm already working in. I don't have to go open up a separate platform and take a look at what's in that platform and figure out what went wrong with that workflow. And the other thing that I've noticed, and I'm sure you've noticed too, is that most of the platforms tend to be opinionated to various degrees of how your workflow should happen. And GitHub's just like, I don't know, man, do what you want. It's fine.
Yep, absolutely. And tying that stuff together, it's just never been very smooth. Even today, there is a GitHub action, I think, that monitors your GitOps actions in a pull request that sends some sort of webhook to like HashiCorp's platform that does all your Terraform stuff. And then it reports back its results as a GitHub action. And it's just kind of messy. And like you have to log into both places. So it could certainly like update your pull request, and then you click through to get the, more details from the specific platform like Spacelift or HashiCorp Cloud. And you can't log in because you forgot your password or it expired. And just that complexity, that drag on your developers is just so rarely worth it. It's more complex.
Oh, I think she froze for a second. It is more complex. I'll agree with that. Kyler, we lost you for a second.
There we go. I'm back. It's
Okay.
just rarely worth it. Yeah. Thank you for your patience here.
No worries. I want to go. Well, we've got a few comments from John in on LinkedIn, so I want to address those real quick. So he said that he built a complete DevOps framework using Ant, which I've never used. Have either of you ever worked with Ant? No, I'm seeing heads shaking. Yeah, I'm curious about it, because I think I've like bumped up against it when I've seen demos of other things, but it's never been something that I've personally worked with. But he asked a question about how to address config drift from a security perspective with Terraform. And and he's kind of said, you know, do you want alerts if the config drifts, and how do you drive that with Terraform? So Kyler, how are you thinking about config drift when it comes to security and sort of how you remediate with Terraform?
Sure. I think when you have general platforms, you don't have a lot of options. You need additional tooling to sort this out. Your options that you can use with native tooling is pretty severe. It's something that I've considered, and you might consider for your company, which is just automatically approved deployments on a schedule. So every hour, fully deploy this Terraform, and if it sees anything, just overwrite it. And that's pretty severe for most environments, right? Like, things change and humans don't have time to convert everything to code right away sometimes. Like if you're fixing an outage, you don't want your CI/CD to overwrite something that fixes an outage. Spacelift and HashiCorp Cloud Platform deal with drift detection pretty well. They can monitor and alert and automatedly fix any drift, which I think is very powerful and much more flexible than the just overwrite everything model. You also have cloud native toolings like Azure policies are quite powerful in terms of detection and remediation of things that are drifted, including like installing extensions that install software on your servers. So like it can even reach into your servers and do stuff. So those are quite powerful. There's no third-party Terraform-y tools that can match what those cloud native things can do. So if you can just have Terraform build those things, then you kind of get the best of both worlds.
Very cool. What about you, Tom? What are your thoughts on dealing with config drift?
I like the brutalist approach of just overwrite everything every hour. That sits right in my book. I think if people, I've not come across a place that does it perfectly. I think analyzing for drift is the best thing, and then having, like, we used to just have an alert in Slack that just popped up, says, hey, there's been drift detected. We used to just run an action every hour or every 2 hours, I think it was, and just say, hey, there's things that want to be changed.
Gotcha. So you'd run a Terraform plan, and if there were, more than 0 changes, that would cause it to issue a message in Slack saying, here's the plan and here's the changes, and you got to figure out what you're going to do about it.
Yeah. And then it'd be a case if somebody goes and takes a look at the plan, assess whether that's like a thing that we knew about. Is that like Kyler said, have we reacted to an incident and we've gone and fixed something that we need to go and add into a PR and add to the Terraform, or is it somebody's done something that they're not meant to? Or
the one thing that Terraform, like that format of drift detection, doesn't really work with is if someone adds a net new resource to the environment that Terraform has no idea about.
Yeah.
So have either of you worked out a system for dealing with that, or you just lock down the consoles for everybody else to such a degree that they can only deploy through Terraform?
I think it's an unresolved issue at every environment I've worked at. I would love for automated imports into Terraform. That's in the future, but that's years away in the Terraform space. Mostly the environments I work in have alerting for manual change detection in prod or sensitive environments. And it's a training opportunity to go talk to them and say, please don't do that. That's not how you should be managing this environment. We have spent all this time on these great tools. But generally, it's not handled in an automated import way, and it's not handled in an automated delete way. It's just a training opportunity that we manually remediate. So not a great automated way that I've seen anywhere yet.
Dustin from YouTube mentioned that having a policy to block deployments for Azure PIM, which I don't remember what that stands for, privileged identity management, maybe, you can make it so folks can't deploy without escalating their privileges, and then it's audited. So I guess is that kind of what you were getting at with policies, Kyler?
No, you can use policies to sort of be, well, yes and no. So I have seen policies that block access to certain resources or actions, and then you get a temporary exception. That certainly works very well in the Azure space. AWS has a long ways to go to get to that level of complexity and sort of point-in-time permissions. It works well.
Yeah, I really like that idea of that workflow where by default, you don't have privileges to make changes to the environment, but every once in a while you do have like a break glass scenario. But that's something where you can see it in the audit logs, you know what was changed about the environment, and then you can backport that into your Terraform code if you need to.
And I like that model that everyone has access, but permissions wise and policy wise, you shouldn't use that access. You should ask for permission. And I like leaving access to folks. I just generally like cultures where we trust folks to respect those accesses. Because sometimes things are on fire and you just need to resolve it quickly. Your uptime is more important than your security. And that's not true in all environments, but certainly the CIA triangle, like all of those are very important for you. It's not just security. Like you can't just secure an environment. You need to keep it up. You need to keep it functional. So I think you have to balance between them. And I don't think locking everyone to reader all the time is keeping that balance.
Right. An interesting thing that I saw recently, I was doing some work with Firefly. They're another sort of platform infrastructure as code company. They can kind of analyze your existing environments and then create Terraform code for you. It's pretty literal in the sense that like everything's hard coded in the config that you get, and then you can refactor it to make it nicer. But one of the things they talked about is, since their service has permissions to scan everything in like an Azure subscription or an AWS account, it can find a resource that's been added that Terraform doesn't know about. And then you can decide what to do about that. So it's sort of like drift detection outside of what Terraform knows.
That's very cool. I would maybe we can tell Hashi to just acquire that team and just put that right in there. That'd be great.
I don't know. Maybe and I don't want to like step on anybody's toes at HashiCorp, but I feel like I don't want them to go on a acquisition spree. Yeah, because I feel like that would put a damper on some of the innovation that's happening if like everybody's just innovating with the goal of being acquired. I feel like that it's not the best situation to be in. I mean, that's just me. I don't know. So Juan asked an interesting question from the LinkedIn side. Do you see the future of CDK, Terraform CDK? Do you think CDK will replace HCL coding? Have either of you worked heavily or at all with CDK or Terraform's CDK?
I've not, but I really hope it doesn't replace HCL.
I agree. I'm a big fan of HCL, and I read on the internet a lot of negative things, that it's not a real programming language, that it's not sufficiently complex for use cases or flexible, but I've made it work for everything I need so far.
Tom, what do you like about HCL that you wouldn't want to see a general purpose language take over?
For me, like the declarative nature of it means it's super simple to follow for everybody. I think it's the learning curve to HCL is really low, so that you can show a developer what HCL is doing and they can follow along. I think the problem when you go to CDK is that it goes into a normal programming language. You've got all the functionality of that programming language. You can then overcomplicate something that should, in theory, be really simple. So I just generally prefer to use HCL. I'm working with somebody at the moment though, who raised a good point about using so they've used CDK to orchestrate HCL in a previous role. And that's something I'm really interested to spend a bit of time with him and learn about how he's used it to orchestrate different stacks of HCL. So I'm skeptical of it for the future. I'm interested to see where it goes. But I love HCL and I think it should be around for the long run. I like Kyler said, I've got it to do everything I've ever needed it to do.
Yeah, so far I haven't run into a limitation that I couldn't get around with without just thinking about it for a little while and going, oh, okay, I just need to shift my approach a little bit. And I think you're absolutely right. It's so approachable as a language because it's not complicated by design. And I also feel like infrastructure is weird, man. It has all these quirks and things that you have to deal with, and HCL just has those quirks built into it. So it's purpose built for dealing with infrastructure that tends to be a little weird or funky. All right, so we have another. Dustin came back to mention that with AWS, potentially you could do something similar by using Azure Active Directory. So I know you can do this. I don't know anybody who's actively doing it today, but yeah, you can integrate single sign-on in AWS to refer back to Azure AD, and then you could control some permissions in that way by having it still be Azure AD PIM driving the escalation. That's super. That I mean, if you're already using Azure AD, why not, right?
I think that sounds great. I have never seen anyone do it with native tooling. I have seen some third-party tools, and their names are all escaping me, that handle point in time escalation of privileges. I think that's really cool, but I haven't been at a company that adopts those platforms yet. It's sure hard to trust a third-party tool with privilege escalation functionality. It's a deep integration into your environment and your workflows and your authorizations that I'm just frankly kind of scared of. I want to control that stuff myself because in every company, it's so nuanced how people get escalated privileges and how they use them and how you audit them. And I don't know. I just haven't worked at a company that does that yet.
Yeah, absolutely. Dustin mentioned. I just wanted to bring this up. The kerfuffle and just general debate of Sentinel versus OPA. Have either of you worked with both Sentinel and OPA at all? Okay, so I'm the one who has opinions about this. so, so I've worked with both languages. So for those who aren't familiar, OPA uses Rego as its DSL. So it's still a domain-specific language. It's just a different one. And then Sentinel uses its own Sentinel policy language to write things. And working with both, I personally found Sentinel's DSL to be more intuitive, maybe because it's closer to HCL in its structure. Whereas I found Rego made my brain turn into a pretzel for a while. But that being said, it does seem like because Rego and OPA is general purpose, and so it works well to enforce policy in things that aren't just Terraform. So, whether it's an Envoy configuration or, something in Kubernetes or whatever, since it has that sort of general purpose vibe, people are adopting it pretty quickly. I would be very curious to see if Sentinel was sort of open sourced and given broader range of what it could apply to beyond just the enterprise products, if that would lead to higher adoption, because I do generally like it better as a tool, but also I can only use it on the paid versions of HashiCorp stuff.
I've raised this before. So I worked when I was at the Ministry of Justice, we really wanted something like Sentinel to be able to apply policies to all of our infrastructure. But it was the only thing at around the time. It was very early when they released it, but it's all for their paid stuff. So you're forced to go with their paid stuff. I get why. I get why they do that, but I would love for it to become an open source thing. But then it detracts from their paid offering. So yeah, I totally get why they don't do that. But I would love to see it come open source.
Several years ago, when we evaluated HTTP to move our Terraform workloads to it, I was like, I can build all of this except for Sentinel. Can you just give me Sentinel? Can I license just that at a lower rate? And they said, no, it's a bundle. It's going to be a bundle as long as we can. And my understanding from the HashiCorp sales team is they're already kind of unhappy with how powerful Terraform is in the open source version, because it's hard to sell the platform because Terraform is so powerful all by itself on other platforms. So I think it will remain bundled, probably.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Well, it's like you said, you don't see a huge need for the platforms like Terraform Cloud until you hit certain very specific roadblocks, because you can do almost all of it with GitHub Actions or Azure DevOps or with the Jenkins file. Honestly, you can pick your existing CI/CD platform of choice, and they all are scriptable enough that you can create the workflow you actually would need, as opposed to going through the pain of adopting another tool. All right, let's see. A lot of comments have come in. Try to comb through them a little bit. Okay. some CyberArk work. Oh, Mark's on. Hi, Mark. Good to see you. Consumption metering. Oh, that would be interesting. I think that has something to do with the new pricing model for Terraform Cloud. Oh, that's interesting. So Mark is saying to demonstrate value to the hyperscalers, they need to show how much consumption they are bringing to the platforms. Well, that's an interesting sort of, hey, Azure, look, because people adopted Terraform, they're using more Azure. That would be a tough business case to prove, but it would be interesting to see. Maybe that's happening behind the scenes, and we don't have any insight into that conversation. I don't know. Interesting.
I do love the way that AWS has kind of taken ownership of the AWS provider in a sense that they're like actively contributing to it and supporting it and breaking deadlocks. And I think that Microsoft has begun that process, but it is sure a slow process. And it's hard to rewrite all that code to be like the AWS provider is generally very, very high quality. And the Azure provider is fine. It's pretty good, but stuff breaks. And you see these little notes that like, if you created this resource before October of 2022, it's configured differently. And like, I know it's because they're developing the Azure cloud and the Azure provider, and it's just not as good. And I hope that Azure and Microsoft just can take more ownership of that provider, because I agree. I think it's a value add. If this very, very popular tool works well with your platform, people are gonna spend more money on your platform. So I just, for me, it's common sense. It makes a ton of sense to take greater ownership.
Yeah, and to extend that a little bit, if you're already an organization that's using Terraform heavily and you're evaluating a potential platform and that platform has a terrible provider experience, you're like, well, no, we're not going to adopt that platform because Terraform's our tool and Terraform doesn't work well with your platform. We'll keep looking.
Yeah. I've talked to our Microsoft TAM before and they were like, just use Bicep. Bicep's just like Terraform. No, it's not. No, and ARM is terrible. I'm just very spoiled with HCL and Terraform. I'm very used to it. I like its patterns. I don't want to learn a different language. And just in a team leadership sense, I don't want to teach all of my developers to use a new language. Like it's a drag on us. It's inefficient when we already know this language that works quite well. So Microsoft, if you're listening, please take ownership of the provider more and invest, because we'll spend more money with you.
Tom, do you have any experience with I don't want you to throw any providers under the bus, but like what's your thoughts on the provider experience, and if you have some Azure thoughts or Google Cloud, because they seem to get left out a lot. What your thoughts are there?
I agree with Carl that the AWS provider is definitely the best provider, I think, on the registry. It gets so much attention from people. Just I think it's so popular that it just gets all the love. I haven't used many others recently. I think the one I used most recently was probably PagerDuty. And that was a small provider. I think it was taken on by PagerDuty themselves. So it was a third party that then like PagerDuty took over that ownership of that thing, and then it got more support. So I think we're starting to see that happen with more providers, and I would definitely encourage Microsoft to do it, because like Carla said, like people will spend more money with your product if you're writing a tool for it. It's just a no-brainer. Like you're making it easy to use your platform, so why wouldn't you do that? Like you've got a tool that's being used by what's Terraform's downloads now? It's over 1 billion downloads or something like that now.
Something like that.
You've got 1 billion downloads of a tool. Enable those users to use it, to use your platform.
Yeah. I mean, regarding the Azure RM provider, I will agree. Some people said in the comments it's gotten better. It has gotten better. I will definitely attest that I've seen major improvements in how it functions, especially with the latest major release. So of course it breaks things from previous releases, but that's the whole point of a major version release, right? So I'm not hating on the Azure RM provider. It's fine. But Kyler and Tom, both to your points, when I use the AWS provider, it is much more likely to run quickly. And I don't know if that's just the way that the Azure API functions, but in my experience, like stuff, whenever I run something against AWS, the plans are faster, the applies are faster than with Azure. Do you have the same sort of experience?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think part of it is because in Azure, you can reach into your host and do stuff with extensions. And those extensions just tend to take time because you have to wait for the computer to boot and register and prepare and do stuff and report status. Yeah, but I think it just takes longer. And Azure's had this sort of longstanding issue where they capitalize stuff differently on input versus output, and you have to ignore specific stuff. And I think the provider's getting updated to handle that, but it's sure annoying to track those down because it's just friction. It's just friction for no reason.
Yeah. Mark in the comments for LinkedIn pointed out that each Azure resource provider is different. And so, how performant your plan is going to be is dependent on those API endpoints for the different resource providers. To which I say back, make them all faster. Wave a magic wand.
I didn't know that they perform slower. I've never worked in Azure, so I've got no insight into what it's like to work with Terraform. But I did not know that they run slower. That is really interesting.
It's just been my personal experience working with both a lot. Is if I run a plan against AWS, it is going to happen like that. And when I run a plan against Azure RM, I'm going to go get a cup of coffee, come back. It's not that it doesn't work. It's just that depending on which resources you're interacting with, you're hitting different API endpoints and it just isn't as fast. So I do know that fortunately there is a dedicated team at Microsoft and they seem to be growing in terms of Terraform support. So I just did a podcast on Day 2 Cloud with two people from that team, Mark Gray and Stephen Ma. And Stephen is the one who he didn't write, but he's sort of championed their Azure Terraform export tool, which is like the tool. It used to be called Azure Terrafy, and then they were forced to change it, which was
that's an excellent name, by the way. Like just 10 out of 10 for that name.
I know, right? I know it's not a very Microsoft-y name, so I know they had to change it. But I was a little sad when he was like, "Yeah, we have to change it to something that's like corporate approved." Yeah. So if any. We should have them on this at some point to chat about what they're doing as well. But I'm glad they have a dedicated a group that's working with that, and they actually have a dedicated Slack group, which Mark just mentioned for Azure and Terraform specifically, and I'm part of that. So if you're heavily into Azure and you're interested, I forget what the exact URL is, but if you just search like Terraform Azure Community, it's like one of the first hits on Google or Bing. I guess you could Bing that. Let's see. Lots of comments have come in. I'm just going to see if I can pick out anything that's.
Let's keep throwing shade at Microsoft and keep those comments coming in.
It's not shade, man. It's just like
it's shade from me. I'm just speaking for myself. It is shade.
Okay.
Make it better. Make it awesome. I love Terraform and I love Azure, and if they work together better, that would be so cool.
Oh yeah, the Azure DevOps provider is not great. It's gotten better, I will say, because I started using that. I don't even think it's 1.0 yet, but I started using it when it was in 0.2 or 3 or something, and it was painful. There was a lot of stuff that wasn't supported, but that's partly because Azure DevOps had to grow a lot as well. Kyle, you mentioned earlier, getting away from the traditional graphical pipelines to writing all your pipeline stuff in YAML. That was a big leap for them.
Absolutely. And I'm sure it's hard culturally to support APIs because they've spent so much time building this just incredibly rich UX where you drag blocks around, and that's such a wonderful way to get started when you're building your first 5 or 10 or 20 pipelines. But when you're managing hundreds or thousands, there's just not enough time in the day to drag all those blocks around.
Even if it's pretty.
Even if it's pretty. And it is pretty. Azure DevOps is very pretty with its cool little blocks and lines and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And on a similar vein, I've used the GitHub provider. It's fine. The authentication appears to be semi-broken most of the time. I can get it working, but I spent hours just getting it to log in to do stuff. So yeah, a lot of the non-first tier providers for clouds, there is a lot of work that needs to be there. So if you want to learn some Go and you want to help integrate the stuff, this is all open source and you can go do some things. Put it on your resume.
Yeah, Dustin seems to agree on the GitHub provider not being that great.
That's the best thing about them being open source is that if you need a resource or you need a thing on a resource, you can go and add it. like I've been working on something and then needed an output on a particular resource. I'm able to go to the source code and commit that and add it myself and then make it better. That's the best thing about Terraform, is that everything, all the providers at least, are open source. So if you find a bug, you can fix it.
Right.
Absolutely.
And every few months, I'm like, I should just learn Go, and then I don't, because unfortunately, I have 100 other things that I also need to learn. Maybe one of these days. I don't know.
I like it in the sense that once you learn it, they have this promise that it won't break in future iterations. So like, I'm calling you out again, Terraform Azure provider, that the future stuff, the major versions where it breaks, Go is supposed to not have those. And that's, a tagline that's hopefully true. But that's so far for the tools I use, true.
Yeah, I guess, and feel free to jump in, but my impression has always been, I expect that a major release of any of the providers is going to have breaking changes, because eternally supporting things backwards compatibility, that has gotten lots of companies into trouble before, to continue to support the older versions of things. But I mean, like, the good news is, if you just stay on the previous major version, that continues usually to get some like security updates and patches for a while. But yeah, AWS really got me when they went from, I think, 3 to 4, and I'm trying to remember exactly. It was something, I think it was the S3 bucket. They totally changed, and it just broke everything.
Every team I've worked with, 100% of the teams I've worked with, and there are dozens, are just not upgrading. They're just not going to change their provider because it like pretty much works, and they just can't do new stuff, and that problem will get worse. There's extensive dialogues from the HashiCorp team of like, should we build a different resource that's the version 2 one, like the Azure provider has done? And right now they're not. It's just is a breaking change, and you just have to rewrite your code when you do that upgrade. But in my experience, no one is. They've just stopped upgrading, and that's a shame. That's a problem that I think Hashi and the open source team will just need to address.
I think it would be really amazing if, in addition to having the release notes and the upgrade path and all that, also have some sort of tooling that can evaluate existing resources and provide you the equivalent of whatever the new resource type is, or the new arguments or whatever, and sort of do a suggested conversion for you.
Absolutely. It's hard when people are using like particularly public modules, but even private modules. It's hard to figure out where all the code is put together from when it comes from different sources, the way Hashi can pull in modules from different places. But even if it's just flat, like the way the imports work for the tool you talked about, Ned, that's a good start. It's a heck of a better start than just saying, oh, I'm going to delete your buckets. I'm going to delete all of your S3 buckets. Sorry.
Whoops. Yeah, that not great. There are a couple of new features that have rolled into Terraform, and I just wanted to get your opinion on both of them. So the import block was released. I'm a fan, but I'm curious if either of you have integrated that into your existing workflows, or if you're actually using the import block to deal with things like drift detection. Tom, what about you?
I've not used it yet. However, I have. As soon as it was released, I was like, oh, "This is amazing!" Like, I needed it years ago. There was just some stuff I remember doing. I was importing. I was creating a whole new environment. And I ended up writing like a bash script to do loads of imports.
Mm-hmm.
It would have been so handy then to have this functionality. So I think it was a big game changer, I think, and I'm really. It makes me less nervous to do like state removes and stuff of Terraform. Like I feel more confident that I can get things back into Terraform easier with that, and document it as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm no practical usage yet.
Gotcha. What about you, Kyler?
Well, it's interesting because I've kind of been doing this for literally years, where you add an empty resource block and then you run a Terraform plan and it says, I'm gonna delete this resource or create this resource, but I'm gonna change all these attributes. And you just copy it, and it has all those little like minus signs. It says, I'm gonna delete this attribute, and you just delete the minus signs, and like, there you go. And some of it's computed and you have to remove those lines, but I've done that, and it's a pain, but it certainly works. So Terraform has been capable of doing this for years, and I'm glad they're getting around to making kind of a formal feature instead of just a bug that I took advantage of. But I've certainly used other tools that do this same thing. I love to see this functionality getting integrated into the core Terraform product. Like it's very powerful. I wish that it would just manage the resource, like just take it over, but like rewriting back to your CI where your code is, like that is complicated and difficult. But maybe we'll get there one day where it reads the resource and writes the config, and then you just update it with a PR next time. Like that would be great.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, the workflow, if you're just running stuff from your desktop, the workflow is pretty easy, right? You just add the import blocks, you go through the plan and apply, it's there, and then you remove the import block, you're done. But yeah, if you're working through a version control system and you've got your automation processes, it's definitely more difficult to fit it all in if you want to have it generate the config for you, which is still an experimental flag, but experimental flag. But I want to see it become, full-blown production.
And potentially that's something we'll see with Spacelift and HashiCorp Cloud Platform like that. Those add-ons are everywhere. Those low-hanging fruit of it in the graphical UI, here's the import config. Do you want to add it to the CI? Click a button and it'll do a pull request against your source. Like that's certainly possible and probably not even that difficult. I haven't developed any of the Terraform provider yet, but I love seeing stuff like that. And I think those platforms are going to continue to add those value add things until they're just unavoidably compelling. And I'm very excited for that. I don't want to pay them any money, but I do want them to continue being employed. So maybe I will.
Gotcha. The other thing they added is check blocks. Have either of you messed around with the check blocks at all?
No, I haven't. I find them very interesting and compelling. I think testing Terraform is still pretty difficult. Like it's still in very early stages in its development. Some teams that I work with do unit testing for modules where we actually deploy it with a basic config, and sometimes even matrix deploys for different permutations and combinations of attributes. But it's pretty manual at this point, and check blocks just help lower the bar for testing code and making sure it works, like it'll actually deploy. Terraform does its best guesses, but it's hard to know until you actually deploy it. So checks help extend that functionality. So, but again, I haven't used it extensively yet. I just find it compelling.
Yeah. I'm real curious to see where they're going with that. And I know that that's not the same as the Terraform test framework that they're trying to build at the same time. They're like somewhat related, but a little bit different too.
I think the checks are super interesting. I think it'd be interesting to see where they go with that Terraform test stuff as well. And the check. Like I like the check for like writing assurances that certain things are almost going to be true when you get to production or like at the end of a plan. But yeah, I'm interested to see how they differentiate the check and the test and stuff.
Yeah, and then there's like the preconditions and the post conditions.
Yeah.
So yeah, a lot of complexity has been introduced, and I feel like a lot of it's somebody maybe asked for a similar feature, and they're like, "Oh, we'll build that," and then they're just kind of like, "All right, now what are people going to do with it?" And that's what I'm most curious about. And I put out a call on LinkedIn. If anybody is using the check block today, I'd love to know how they're using it, because I want to do like a video about it. And I can use the contrived examples that are in the Terraform documentation, but I'd rather have someone go, no, this is how I'm actually using it today. Because I think that's what people find more useful than what's in the getting started or the README.
My educated guess is we're starting to see this great propagation of public modules that do cool stuff and are secure and are compelling to use versus writing your own private modules. And having checks permits them to validate stuff. I think that's the use case for checks is public modules. I think that's why we're seeing these start to show up.
Would you see any utility in writing a public module that's all checks?
I have written public modules that provide metadata resources like block listed IPs, so people can call the module and get the shared list of IPs from a central location of like bad IPs to block or bad URLs or whatever. But I have not seen anything for just calling checks. I think that's cool. Let's write it. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Yeah, that's yeah, because I too, I've seen modules that are all data source centric, or even like one of the most popular modules out there is Cloud Posse wrote that label module, and it doesn't create any resources or data sources. It is purely there to do labeling magic for you. It's all it does. And I'm like, wow, that's super useful. And it uses, I don't think it uses any providers. It's just like, we're building out all these local values and then giving you back the outputs of how we munged up the labeling that you submitted.
I have seen a team do that for naming. Their naming scheme was just in one place, and all of their modules called the naming module, and it gets sent back like naming primitives. And I thought it was cool, but just pretty complex for what you get. So I'm interested to read more.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's marching orders for us, is to go write a public Terraform module that all it does is take some inputs and then run checks against the inputs. See if it works. All right. Weekend project. We're coming up on towards the end of the stream. So before everybody signs off, I just want to give you an opportunity to plug your stuff. If you got a podcast or a video series, or I don't know, whatever you're out there doing today. Tom, why don't you go first? What do you have out there that you want people to know about?
Not much. I'm going through a journey of rebuilding my home lab at home. So I've got 16 Raspberry Pis that are all PoE powered, and I've got an old Dell R720. This was all because I've never worked in a real data center. I wanted to get hands-on experience working with bare metal. So I tweet about all that stuff a lot. So go and follow me on Twitter if you're interested in Raspberry Pis, net booting Raspberry Pis, net booting loads of Raspberry Pis, and running using Terraform to configure a load of that stuff. Eventually we'll be running the whole HashiStack on my home lab. So if you want to follow along for the journey, then just follow me on Twitter.
Yeah, very cool. All right. I will. Kyler, what about you? I know you got a lot going on.
I'm interesting because I was saying I have a toddler now, so I'm kind of taking it easy, but my taking it easy is still pretty frenetic. I am very active on Medium, KYMIDD on Medium, and my label on screen is an actual real website you can go to, kyler.omg.lol, which is fantastic for a domain name. And that has all my bookmarks and stuff, and come check it out. I was just recently in some GitHub podcasts, and just lots of blogs coming your way. I try to write this Let's Do DevOps series that has lots of pictures and little code snippets of Terraform primarily, but other stuff too, of just how to do DevOps from the ground up. So come learn.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely recommend checking that out. I've benefited from some of your posts personally, so thank you.
Awesome.
And lastly, it's me. I'm Ned. You can find me. I'm less on Twitter these days, mostly on LinkedIn in terms of public presence, because Twitter is Twitter. And I'm not on Threads because I don't like Meta. But if you want to find me, go to nedinthecloud.com. That's the easiest way. All my links are there. And I guess the other thing I want to promote is my podcast, Chaos Lever. It's current tech events with a historical perspective. So if that sounds interesting to you, last week we covered the whole Red Hat Enterprise Linux debacle and looking back at, the roots of Linux up to the present day. And I thought that was a pretty fun episode. So definitely check that out, chaoslever.com. That's going to do it for today. Thank you so much, Kyler and Tom, for joining the live stream. And we'll see everybody in a month. All right. Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.